Hello, and welcome back to E.G. the Virgo, an unusual kind that 1%. One life, 5 generations, based on actual experiences and theories. This story includes entertaining fictional and non fictional images, animations, videos, and music by artists and photographers unrelated and in no way were created for this particular story or documentary. Some names, dates, and times were changed to protect the privacy and identities of the characters within the story. Okay, this is still volume 1, so let's go right into our disclaimer. Okay, we got a copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act of 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use. This source is from Circular 92, Copyright Law of the United States, 17 U.S.C., and that's in Section 107. So, we're going to get right into this. This next one here, another little journey of the Chapter 17, Mischievous Competitions. Again, you don't have to sit and listen to me. You can just, turn me off and read it for yourself and, continue flipping through or moving forward on your own from your own device or TV. But I do it again for people with the disability, and I might narrate a little different than what you might see written on the screen. So, without further ado, we're going into this 9-year-old's life as far as her journey, and remembering that there is a purpose for an unusual kind, that 1%. A lot of times we don't know or recognize it unless we recall or recollect everything from when we were younger all the way up to now, in order to try to figure out, now, why is this going on with me? How did this begin? Where did it start? And why? That is the biggest question, and that is what we set out to answer from a long time ago when we first started these chapters of an unusual kind, that 1%. And you can go all the way back to the beginning and here and then work your way up. Again, like I said, we're only on chapter 17, and I'm sorry it took me a while to post this, but I had some things I had to do the last couple of weeks, so I am getting it out there as fast as I can. But I want to make sure that you will enjoy, and that enjoy the journey, as well as making sure that you all can find the pictures, because these are pictures that's depicting things from the 70s. So some of us can relate. I mean, if you're born in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and maybe early 80s, you might be able to relate. You should be able to, or you might be able to relate to a lot of this. And you also see the difference in education then and education now, how the educational system has changed, the values in it and everything. Whereas the values in the educational system today is far more different and not as, I would say, not as good as it was back then. Because back then the teachers, you had a lot more teachers, not that teachers today don't care, but you had a lot more teachers who were really involved and really about their jobs, and really cared for children, and was about the protection of them and enhancing those abilities and talents within those children to make sure that those children can progress. But without further ado, let's get into Chapter 17, Mischievous Competitions. Okay, so continuing on from Chapter 16, of course, after E turned 9 years old, she had not only just begun a new school in her new neighborhood, along with practicing the clarinet on weekends, but she was picked by her 4th-grade teacher, Mrs. Ryan, to enter a school contest to recite a full-page poem by memory. And that's something. Miss Ryan knew E had excellent memory for learning and felt E would make a good candidate for the poem contest for their classroom. E was also good in sports and got permission from her mother to join the school's tennis team. E liked keeping herself busy, so she had no problem juggling the two school activities. During this time, each night, E would go home and study the full page poem along with having to use body and hand gestures as she would recite the poem, which the judges were also going to score them on. E was in school during the day. When she was in school during the day, she would practice playing tennis in her school's gym. Any students trying out for the tennis team was excused from their normal gym class to attend the gym class for tennis tryouts. Now that tells you right then and there, this school had two gyms, or what they call a split gym. A gym where they had rolling walls where they can close the walls, and it would split the gym into two, where you had one gym on this side and another gym on that side. That way, if they needed to separate the gym for some reason, they could without having, the kids being interrupted. So, as I continue, E really enjoyed playing tennis so much, she never concerned herself with it being a competition. Okay? One day at school, during class, or should I say during recess, E and her new classroom buddies, Benita and Sharita, who were identical twin girls, were all out enjoying their time in the sun and on the playground equipment. Benita and Sharita were very nice, friendly little girls who had a lot of friends at that school. One of the twins introduced E to two other little girls whose names were Sharon and Nancy. After everyone was introduced to E, all five of them continued playing together during recess and every day thereafter. While E continued practicing for both of the school competitions, she didn't understand until her mother fully explained to her that the competition for both activities would be against other fourth grade classroom students within her elementary school. E was still okay with that because she was only in it for the fun and not to be competitive. Having a clear understanding of the competitions, E realized her other four little friends were also trying out for the tennis team, and Sharon and Nancy were both individually picked by their classroom teachers to participate in the poem contest too. Okay, so it's a lot going on here. So each one of them had something in common with one another. Now came time for the tennis competition drafts. Many girls waited impatiently to hear if their names would be called as one of the draft picks, including E. As the coach of the tennis tryouts went down the list calling out names, E and all the other girls clapped and cheered for the student peers who made the team, while they continued waiting on the wooden retractable gym bleachers to see if their names were going to be called. Then finally, the time had come for E and her friends. The first names the coach called among E and her four little friends were the twins, Sharita and Benita, or Benita and Sharita, whichever way you want to put it first. E, Sharon, and Nancy all cheered for the twins as they walked together to the other side of the gym and sat on the bleachers along with all the other girls who made the tennis team for the tryouts. The coach then called out a few other names, including E and Sharon. E, Sharon, the twins, and Nancy all jumped for joy. Sharon, E, and the twins all hugged each other in excitement for making the team. Then the coach asked that everyone settle down on making too much noise so the other students who were still waiting in hopes for their names to be called could hear if their names were going to be called next. After asking the girls to quiet down, Coach Tammy thanked everyone for their hard efforts for participating in the tennis tryouts and said it was hard to only pick a few out of many great performing students, and that it was the end of the list for those who made the tennis tryouts. Coach Tammy further asked for no one to be discouraged because there would be other chances to try out for the tennis team next year, and stated she was sure that they would make the team the next time around. While the coach was still giving verbal instructions to the students who didn't make the team, Sharon, and the twins realized Nancy's name wasn't called and she didn't make the team. All four of the girls looked across the gym where the girls who didn't make the team was still seated and saw Nancy. They all saw Nancy looking sad with tears in her eyes and her arms folded across her chest in a pouting posture. Just as all five of the girls locked eyes with Nancy, the coach walked along the bleachers where Nancy and others were still sitting and began dismissing them back to their regularly scheduled classes. Sharon, and the twins watched as Nancy sadly walked out of the gym with the other girls who didn't make the team. Also noticed Nancy wasn't the only girl crying because they didn't make the team. Nancy's homeroom teacher, along with other homeroom teachers, were all there to gently greet the girls and to take those students who didn't make the team back to their own classrooms and console them. It was an emotional afternoon for all the girls and the teachers. Because this was all new to she wasn't sure what to feel. Was still processing the concept of this whole competition thing. Continued watching the girls leaving the gym in somewhat concern for them. Began wondering if those girls who didn't make the team were going to be okay. The next day in school, Sharon, the twins, and Nancy all met up in the lunchroom as usual, sat down, and had lunch together. However, Nancy wasn't quite herself that day. Nancy was still grieving over being the only one of them who didn't make the tennis team. And the girls did their best in trying to make Nancy feel better. After they all finished eating their lunch and cleaning up their area where they ate, the girls all sat back down at their lunch table and quietly waited for the cafeteria aide to dismiss them for recess. Recess was Eve's favorite part of the day during school. When Eve's lunch table was called for recess, Sharon, and the twins all quickly jumped up in excitement and fast walked over to the cafeteria door that led out to the playground. But Nancy slow walked to the door behind them. Once outside, Sharon, and the twins all dashed over to the swings. When they realized Nancy was further behind them, Sharita, the older twin between the two of them, and her sister by 5 minutes, told Nancy to hurry along while she was holding a swing for Nancy next to her so no one else would get the swing, to make sure they could all swing together next to each other. Once Nancy finally arrived to the swing, she just sat in the swing moping with her head looking down at the ground while and the others had fun swinging as high and fast as they could. After swinging for a while, Sharon then suggested they take their normal walk around the schoolyard and talk as they normally would do. So E and the twins stopped swinging and decided to take Sharon up on her suggestion. Nancy got off her swing and slowly tagged along with them too. As the girls were casually walking about the fenced-in schoolyard, they were all excitedly talking about what they were going to do when school let out for the summer. So these are the things that, you hear these 8, 9, and 10-year-olds talk about that, oh, I'm going to do this. We're going here. My cousins are coming over for the summer. We're going to visit my grandma. We're going over here. These were exciting things that the kids, not going back and just worrying about playing a game or something or being on the internet or on, it wasn't that. They were kids who were out and about. Creativity was already stirring in their minds, and that's what we're missing in a lot of the kids today. They're not out and about. You rarely see kids riding bikes and big wheels anymore. That's exercise. Those were good cardio exercises, and a lot of kids back then were a lot more healthier than the kids are today. Why? Because they were out and about more. They used their minds more. They were more creative. And we need to go back to those times. But I digress. Let's move on to the next page. I can go on with this forever. E, of course, talked about how she and her family goes to Philly for the summer to visit her great-grandmother, her grandmother, her uncle, and her friends. Sharon and the twins thought that was going to be a fun trip. However, Nancy gave a more shocking response to E's summer expectations. Nancy stated E was always bragging about being from Philly and how all her family was from Philly. And Nancy further stated she was tired of hearing about how E was from Philly because Philly was nothing but a big dirty place just like E. E's eyebrows knitted together in disbelief in Nancy's behavior and accusations. E responded to Nancy by saying she didn't even know her until one of the twins introduced them and never talked to Nancy about Philly until that day. E further responded and said that Philly wasn't a big dirty place and where her family and friends live in Philly was all clean with houses much bigger than the houses in Delaware and that she wasn't a dirty person. E continued on by saying to Nancy that her mom makes sure she's clean every day. Nancy then countered E's remarks by stating that E's clothes are old and dirty and E's hair was always messed up because E's mother doesn't take care of her. E felt hurt and didn't know why Nancy would say such lies about her for no reason. Now remember, E's the new kid on the block. During the word exchange between Nancy and E, Sharon and the twins, who were all listening, decided to verbally intervene. Benita, whom she and her sister was always well kept in appearance, said, E doesn't look dirty to us, and her hair looks pretty, and her clothes look nice too. Sharon looked at Nancy and asked her why she would say that about E. And Sharita concurred with Sharon by repeating Sharon's question to Nancy. Before Nancy could respond, Benita commented to Nancy and said that E was all of their friend. Both Sharon and Sharita agreed with Benita. And also, I should have mentioned in the beginning of the story is that I want to remind you all these, again, the characters you see in the pictures of these characters you see in here are not the actual characters, just so you all know. They're not the real people, and neither are the images, but the images help you paint an idea of what things were like or what people may have looked like or how they may have been. That's all it's doing. It's not really the actual characters. I just wanted to put that out there. Okay, in continuing, Nancy then directed to Sharon and the twins to look at E's hair and her old dirty clothes. Nancy further said that E's hair was knotty. Well, those words from Nancy didn't set right at all with 9.5-year-old Sharon, because in E's defense, Sharon stated that E's hair was longer and straighter than her own hair. Basically, if you saying her hair is knotty, you must be saying my hair is really, really knotty. And then that Sharon, or that she had family in Philly too. Sharon had family in Philly too. And they weren't dirty, and neither were their houses and streets dirty in Philly. So Sharon is saying she had family in Philadelphia too, and nobody there was dirty. This is what she was proclaiming to Nancy. Sharon continued by telling Nancy she was lying on E because E's clothes looked newer than Nancy's clothes. And Sharita intervened again by stating she thinks Nancy feels that way because Nancy has long, silky, jet black hair that she has to do herself every morning before school. And because Nancy's hair was so long, it was probably hard to do by herself, whereas E's mother does her hair every morning. This may have been Sharita's 9-year-old way of trying to feel sorry for Nancy, who visibly actually had less than everyone else, but didn't know how to verbally express that thought clearly. E then responded again and told Nancy she was the only one among them who had dirt spots on her pants and old run-down sneakers on her feet. Nancy then stated E was the reason why she didn't make the tennis team because now it was too many of them as friends and the coach had to keep the numbers even. So because now it was 5 of them instead of 4 of them, Nancy felt the coach picked E, for one, because E was a new student, and 2, because Nancy felt it was because she was the only Latino among them. Sharon felt that wasn't true because Coach Tammy, who was white, was nice to everybody, including Nancy. Sharon and Nancy were the closest and friends and had known each other longer. So Sharon was really bothered with the way Nancy was behaving. After that, Nancy looked at E and rolled her eyes and finished by telling the others to look at E again because E was taller and skinnier than all of them, for which Nancy felt made E a goofy-looking person. At that point, the recess bell rang for everyone to come inside and go back to their classes. E, the twins, Sharon, and Nancy all began heading back in the school, feeling awkward. But E felt hurt, embarrassed, and out of place. E knew nothing that Nancy said about her was true. However, E just couldn't process what had just taken place. When it was time for school to let out for the day, E and the girls all met at the front school door, like usual, to walk home together, but they were all quiet. Nancy broke the silence by telling Sharon and the twins not to be friends with E anymore. For some unknown reason, E didn't respond to Nancy's comment. They all just continued quietly walking home together until it came to a point where they all had to split up to turn down their own streets to go home. Sharon and the twins and E all turned on another street together to go home, but Nancy had to continue walking 2 more blocks up alone to get to her house. When it was time for the twins, and Sharon to branch off from Nancy, the twins gave a low, lazy bye to Nancy as opposed to the more cheerful bye they would normally always say. Sharon gave an abrupt, nonchalant bye without even looking at Nancy, and E didn't say anything at all. Nancy looked back at Sharon and the twins as she continued straight in hopes they wouldn't become more friendly with E than her. However, as soon as Sharon, and the twins had taken another street to get to their houses, they soon forgot about Nancy and began talking and laughing as usual all the way to their own streets where their houses sat. The next morning, while walking towards school on the same path E would travel going home, she uncannily met up with Sharon and the twins for the first time since she ever walked to school. E didn't realize it until she heard some kids calling her name. E looked around and saw it was Sharon and the twins calling her name and gesturing for her to come join them in walking to school. E felt much better and crossed a small street to join with Sharon and the twins as they all continued walking to school. Benita said, because they know how close E lives to them and Sharon, they could always meet up in that same spot they just met so they can all walk to school together. E also found out that the twins and Sharon lived on the same block but 8 houses apart from one another, which is how they came to be walking to school and back home with each other every day. When they arrived at school, Sharon, and the twins were pulled from their normal gym class to participate in the tennis lineups. Nancy did not like seeing all 4 of them leaving the class together. Upon getting to the tennis lineups, discovered Coach Tammy had paired everyone into groups of 2, so the tennis matches would be 2 against 2. The coach paired the twins together and paired and Sharon with other students, but Sharon asked the coach if she and could be partners, and the coach agreed. Sharon, and the twins were all very happy they were still together. Throughout the day, from the time they walked to school together to the time they were put on tennis teams, no one talked about the problems Nancy caused the day before. That situation never crossed E's mind at all until lunch. As Sharon, and the twins sat at the lunch table, happily talking about the tennis matchup, Nancy decided she would leave their table and go eat with some other students she felt she had more in common with. Nancy went and sat with 2 other girls who were also Latino. Okay, here we go. The twins asked Nancy why she was leaving their table, and Nancy said she didn't want to sit with dirty people. And Sharon, not quite understanding what Nancy was implying, angrily proclaimed to Nancy that she wasn't dirty and neither was the twins or Nancy just shrugged her shoulders and went on to sit with the other girls. As soon as Nancy sat down with the other girls and began talking at the same time, all the girls sitting at Nancy's new table looked over at E's table in disgust and rolled their eyes at E, Sharon, and the twins. E ignored their negative actions, but Sharon and the twins said that Nancy was probably talking bad about them by telling lies and was acting like a two-faced person. Going forward, the time for the poem competition was fast approaching, but not before E, Sharon, and the twins had to face off with a couple of other girls during a few tennis matches. Uncannily, the two other girls Nancy had chosen to start sitting with at lunchtime were also in the tennis matches. So, she just couldn't get away from it, could she? Karma is something else. Nevertheless, all four of the girls performed remarkably during their tennis matches. Neither E and Sharon nor the twins lost a match. The four couldn't have been happier. By this time, E, Sharon, nor the twins never worried about or held anything, or shall I say, any further discussion regarding Nancy. However, little did E know, the next day in school was going to become very emotional. The next school day, E, Sharon, and the twins all happily met up to walk to school together as promised. The girls continued eating lunch and playing together during recess. The bell sounded to let the children know recess was over, and E, Sharon, and the twins all reported to gym for another tennis match after attending one of their other classes. The girls were very excited and feeling confident about their next tennis matches. They couldn't wait to get started. The gym was full with other students and former tennis players. That's why the teacher said, don't worry, you'll get it in the next year. Because apparently she makes sure she gets them all in. She just can't get them all in the same year. She just does it each year. The former tennis players were waiting to see the competition. When E, Sharon, and the twins were told to take their places on the court, the girls were confused. They knew only two could play on each team, so why did Coach Tammy tell all four of them to take their places on the court? Coach Tammy and another coach both guided the girls to their positions on the court after E and them emerged from their locker rooms after changing into their tennis outfits. To E, Sharon, and the twins' surprise, they were matched up to play against each other because there were no other opponents. This was the final tennis match for the school year. E and Sharon's hearts began beating a little faster than normal. The twins looked across the tennis net in shock and in disbelief, but nevertheless, the game had to be played. The twins would get to serve the ball first, which came in the direction of E, who slammed the ball back over the net in the direction of Benita. The match went on for about another 30 minutes until Sharon served the ball in the direction of Sharita, who then firmly spiked the ball right back past Sharon, who didn't expect such a quick response from Sharita and missed the ball. The game was over. The four girls walked up to the middle of the tennis net and shook hands. The tennis trophies were immediately presented to the twins, one for each of them. E and Sharon received tennis certificates of participation for second place. E was satisfied because she had never received a school award before, but Sharon was not happy with herself because she missed the ball, which caused them the game. And after receiving her award, Sharon immediately ran off the court back to the locker room crying. E and the twins saw Sharon was upset and crying and immediately followed behind her. After doing the best a 9-year-old could do in making their friend feel better, Sharon eventually got over the loss and they all left to walk home together, talking about the tennis matches the whole way home. 2 weeks later, it was time for the poem competition. Again, all students who was part of the competition had to report to the gym. But this time, the gym was set up much different than the tennis matches. The audience was also very much different. There was nothing on the floor of the gym at all except for a long table on the side where judges were sitting who would be doing the scoring. And the audience was all adults, parents and teachers of the students who were chosen to be in the poem contests. Each child was called up to stand in the middle of the gym floor and face the judges to recite the full page poem, which was about 2 minutes long. After every child had had their turn, the judges would make their decision as to who the winner would be. The host of the poem contest called for complete silence from everyone in the gym as the contest was about to begin. The host wanted no noise from anyone so that the participants could concentrate much better and requested that everyone only clap after each student had completed the poem. They were all reading from the same poem. Every teacher who sponsored their own student was also in attendance, as well as the parents and family members of the students. This competition was so serious that it took place after school when all the other children were sent home. It also gave parents time to get off work to make it in time to the school to see their child or children's performance. This felt really intense for E. E was so nervous she didn't know her mother and siblings were all there, sitting in the gym bleachers waiting to see her performance of reciting this long poem from memory. All the candidates were standing alongside of each of their teachers who were also there to support, to comfort them and ease their students' nerves. The host tested the microphone in which she would use to call each contestant up to the middle of the gym floor to begin reciting a poem. It was not necessary for anyone to be dressed up. They felt it would be easier on the participants if they were allowed to be dressed comfortable and see others dressed comfortable as well. The microphone was now ready, and the host called on the first student using their full names to come up to stand in the middle of the floor where she was standing. E noticed no one was smiling as far as she could see. Everyone looked serious. E was about to get her first real true test of what competition actually felt like. The only light in the gym was the sunlight trying to squeeze through the narrow gym windows, trimming the top of all four walls around the gym. The host wanted the gym lighting to be calm for better concentration instead of bright lights which could cause distraction for the young participants. The first student called up walked very reluctantly towards the middle of the floor. The host gently greeted them with a handshake, told them where to stand and the direction for them to be facing when they began reciting the poem. She wished them good luck and then walked away and left the student alone in the middle of the floor and quietly went and stood behind the judges' tables, which were all pushed together so it looked like one big long table. There was about 3 long rectangular tables pushed together, actually. E saw the first student's facial expression that looked like the child wanted to break down crying. The child was instructed to begin whenever they were ready. The gym was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. After 2 more students were called, the host called Sharon Latham. E knew that was her friend Sharon. E watched Sharon closely and thought she did well. Another student was called afterwards. Then they called the name Nancy Rodriguez. E knew that was Nancy. E thought Nancy did well too, despite how she felt. As soon as Nancy was done, E heard her full name being called. E's heart felt like it dropped down to her stomach. E nervously walked up to the middle of the quiet gym, shook hands, listened for the host's instructions, and then began reciting the poem. E's right leg shook the entire time she was reciting the poem from her being so nervous. And remember, they're scoring on that, 3 more students were called after E, and then the judges were ready to make their announcement of who the winner would be. The host walked back to the middle of the gym room floor, holding the judge's decision. The host, with a straight and serious face, then called out Nancy's name as the first place winner, E as the second place winner, and a boy named Rufus as a third place winner. The host then congratulated every student who bravely participated in such a tense competition and officially ended the competition. E felt bad she hadn't made first place after trying so hard. Sharon left the gym again crying with her mother, who was explaining to her how proud she was of her. Nancy was very happy as her teacher and the host both were congratulating her. E received praise from her teacher, Miss Ryan, for trying and doing her best. Miss Ryan gave E her second place certificate in addition to special gifts of her own, which was a thick coloring activity book, a 48 count of Crayola crayons with a built-in sharpener, and a great big hug. E's mother and siblings walked over to E and gave her big hugs as well. E became happy again after seeing all her family was there. E was surprised because she didn't know that her family was going to surprise her by being there. E's mother felt it was best not to tell E because if E knew they would be there, E would have probably became distracted and from remembering the words to the poem. E's mother suggested they all go out and have pizza and soda to celebrate E's accomplishments in her school activities. After E and her siblings excitingly and happily all loaded up in her mother's big gray 1972 Chevy Caprice to head to the pizza shop, as they drove past the school from where E's mother was parked, E saw Nancy walking home alone, holding her certificate. E wondered why no one from Nancy's family showed up to see her perform, and maybe no one in Nancy's family really cared about her as much as E's family cared about her. E then remembered Nancy saying that E's mother didn't care about her But in reality, it was probably Nancy's family who may not have been, actually who may have been too busy to have cared enough for her, for Nancy. E sat back in the car and relaxed, thinking to herself as they drove on towards the pizza shop that she was glad she never really said anything really horrible back to Nancy as she could have, because it showed it was not necessary, as God just revealed everything to E in a short 2-month time span. It all made sense now. E knew then she had won against Nancy on every level, despite Nancy's false comments about her. And again, just to add to that, Nancy, you never know, her family, she could have she could have been being raised by a single parent who probably couldn't make it there because she probably had to work to support the household alone, and she probably couldn't get off. And Nancy may have had more siblings, and, it was just probably too much. Maybe they didn't have a car. And then also maybe Nancy may have been the oldest who probably had to take care of the others. So again, E, being a 9-year-old she was very observant and analyzed that whole situation for herself. And that was amazing. And those little 9-year-olds, they had little minds like that. I don't know if you remember this little cartoon called Recess. They sound like almost like the Little Rascals, but, they were fourth graders too, the Little Recess, that cartoon. It was a Disney cartoon called Recess. When you get a chance, check it out, because it shows you how kids thought back then and how mature and, smart and intelligent they were. Their creative thinking skills were very, very well enhanced. And their comprehension levels were more on point than what the kids are today, because I don't think they're into creative thinking skill classes in elementary school anymore. I don't think they get down into that, but the schools don't realize how important that is. I mean, the kids started cursive writing in first and second grade. They took that out of schools altogether, and what they replaced it with probably wasn't really worth taking it out. But I digress. So, despite Nancy winning the poem competition, she unfortunately knew Nancy still lost. And they're talking about E. So, E felt that even though Nancy won the competition, she felt Nancy still lost. The biggest loss for Nancy was E, Sharon, Sharita, and Benita, her friends. E felt bad for Nancy because in reality, all of Nancy's mischievous competitiveness caused Nancy to actually lose in every match against E. So no matter what she did to try to put E down, she lost. And now, even though Sharon, Sharita, Benita, E, they were all black children. Nancy was Hispanic, Latino. They were all still cool. See, Sharon and Nancy were best of friends way before any of these other kids. Before Sharon, before E and the twins. So they weren't really concerned about how Nancy looked or anything like that until Nancy brought the attention on E. And that's when they were listening to her talk about E, and then that gave them, they said, well, let me look at you. So they looking at her, so she made them look at her and bring attention on herself, because they weren't even thinking about that until she said something. And then come find out, she's walking home alone, and she ain't with those two girls she thought she was going to be with, because those two girls had lived in a better bracket than she did as well. So again, she should have stayed with the friends that she had, that she could walk to school with or walk back, home with, at least as far as she could walk, because they were all city walking kids, and, it just goes to show, again, you know, an unusual kind, that 1%. And it didn't matter to, it didn't matter for her to get any friends. So she has who she has. And again, we like to thank you all. End of chapter 17, Mischievous Competitions.